Hey guys, we are going to improve our DevOps skills in this lecture. CDK stands for Cloud Development Kit. It's a tool developed by AWS to help you deploy your cloud infrastructure. CDK lets you write your infrastructure as code. It supports multiple languages, including JavaScript, TypeScript, and Python. For this course, we will use CDK in Python. First thing first, we will create a new user dedicated to CDK. So you can do that in AIM, which is the tool provided by AWS to manage users, roles, and permissions. As usual, you can click here if you see AIM in the recently visited tools, or you can just type here in the search bar and find it. So we will create a user. You can click here. Here I have already created an admin user, but you will probably have no users here. We have this button, create user. Click. We can give a name to our user. We'll name it, for example, CDK user. And you can click here to provide a management console. So if you need a user only for CDK, it's not mandatory. But here in this case, I propose you to create a CDK user that will also use to connect to the AWS console. It's easier to debug and it's a good way for you to learn. On production systems, you don't want to enable management console. And for the privileges, you will see that we will give a lot of privileges to this user. On production environment, of course, you want to restrain those privileges and only give the minimal set of privilege needed. So here in this course, we will give the management console access. You have here a few options about the password. The most easy way is to keep an auto-generated password that will be created for you. And the first time you will log in, AWS will ask you to create a new password. And this way you can have a secure account. Yeah, let's click on next. Okay, now we will give permissions to our user. So if you already have groups, you can add the user to a group, and all the users from the same group will have the same privileges. But it's not the case here. You can also copy permissions from other users, but that's not what we are going to do here. We will just directly attach new policies. If you are not familiar with AWS, just know that policies is the way for AWS to know if a user can or cannot perform an action. So you can allow or disallow someone to do something. In here, in this case, we'll look for the administrator access just over here. You can click on the plus icon to see the policy, and it's a very simple policy. It allows every action on every resource. So you can do whatever you want. So for this course, we'll choose this policy. But as I said, if you are in an environment, in a production environment, you don't want to give admin privileges, then you can fine tune and fine grain your privileges. For example, if you only need CDK to play with Lambda, you can look for the Lambda policies. And for example, here we have Lambda full access. You can see that you are allowed to perform all those actions on every resources, but only those actions. You cannot do other things. So for now, let's keep with what we have already chosen, the administrator access, and click on next. So here you see a summary, a review of what you are about to do. We'll create a CDK user with the administrator access. AWS will automatically add the change password policy because as you saw previously, when you will log in, you will need to change your password. And again, you can add some tag if you want, but we don't need that for this course. And then you can create user. Here we go. So now we have this URL. You can just copy paste it and log in. You have the username and you have the password. You can copy paste it by clicking here, or you can just show the password. So now I let you go to this URL. It will obviously not be exactly the same as my URL. And you can enter your password. Again, it will not be exactly the same password. And let's see what we have over there. So now let's go to our IAM dashboard again, to users, and we have now our CDK user. So now we have a user, but we need to create security tokens, security keys, to be able to use that user with CDK. Let's click on the user, and if you go to this tab, security credentials, you can scroll a little bit and you will find access keys. That's what we need. We need access keys for CDK to use this user. You can click here on create access key. You can just use other, there are a few use cases, and for some use cases, you can use other AWS tools to authenticate. But for this course, we will not cover all those way to authenticate with CDK or with other AWS tools. So let's click on other, next. You can give a description, but it's optional, so we'll just create the access key. So now we have the access key and the secret key. You need to save them. You can also download the CSV file that contains the access key and the secret key, and it's really important to save them in a secure place. Once you have downloaded the file or copy paste the access key and the secret access key, you can just click on done. You continue, and boom. Now if you scroll, you see you have some access key here, and you can add some description if you want. You can deactivate or reactivate some access key. It's very helpful, for example, if you will do a break and you know you will not need those access keys for a few weeks or a few months. You can simply deactivate and reactivate them, and you can also delete the access keys. But you can find here the access key. You will never be able to see again the secret access key. That's why you need to download it in the previous page. Okay, now we have everything. We'll open the terminal and start working. You need to have the AWS CLI installed. There is a link in the resource of this lecture with the documentation built by AWS on how to install or update the AWS CLI. So please go there, read that page, install the AWS CLI, and when it's done, you can get back to this video where we'll make sure that it's properly installed. So once we have followed the AWS documentation for the CLI, we can double check that it was correctly installed by running AWS -- version. You may have a different version than me, it's perfectly fine. Just for your information, if you are on the root of your machine, you will see that there is a .aws / folder, and in this folder, you will find your credentials. That's where AWS will store the credential to use them for the CLI. And what we will do here, we will create profiles. So instead of having just one set of credentials from one user, we want to create profiles so we can have multiple connections and multiple users. This way, for example, you can interact with different AWS accounts. I can interact with my dev account and with my prod account, or I can just interact with project A, and then I have another account with another user to interact with project B, and that's a good way to manage your privileges. So to do that, you type AWS configure, and if you just stop there, you will configure a new user, but a main user with a main set of credentials. Instead, what I propose you to do is to use -- profile, and then you can name the profile as you want. Here I name it serverless course, but you can really name it how you want. And this way you will configure only this profile. Once I tap here, it will ask you the access key, so you can copy paste your access key. Then your secret key, you can copy paste your secret key over here. And then it will ask you the default region. I use EU Central 1, but you can use any other default region if you want. Just make sure that you remember the default region that you use, because it will have an impact for CDK. So if you want to follow along with me and not bother about the region, just use the EU Central 1 region for now. And you can choose the default format. You can choose between JSON and XML. Let's use JSON for now. Okay, and now our profile is properly configured. So what you can do now is to do AWS STS get caller identity and then use your profile. This command will ask AWS to remember which user you are currently using. So if I run this command, you will see that I am this user from this account. It's a very good way to know which profiles is related to which account if you forgot this. And if, for example, I do the same command without profile, now you see I have an error because I have no root user, no main user created, only users via profile. So now that you have done that, remember the name of your profile. You will need it later in the next video. And we are done with the AWS CLI for now. Now we are going to focus on CDK. You can go to the code of this lecture in the lecture 5 directory and open the README file. We have already covered the first point about the AWS CLI, and now we are going to continue with CDK. So first we need to install CDK. Let's copy paste this command into our terminal. CDK is already installed on my machine, so it's quite quick, but for you it may take more time. And then we run CDK version to check that it's properly installed. Of course, you may have a different version than me, it's perfectly fine. And then we need to bootstrap CDK. So let me explain a little bit more about this command. So bootstrap means that we are going to prepare CDK just so we can use it later to deploy our resources. Then here you need to copy paste your account ID. So this is my account ID. I'm going to show you where you can find your account ID in a second. And then you need to define the region where you want to use CDK. So for this course, we will go with the EU Central 1 region, but you can change it, of course. Just make sure that you will use the same region throughout this course so that you can follow along with us. And then you can define the profile. So this is the profile that we have defined with the AWS CLI. So let's copy paste this function. And just remember that for you, you need to change this account ID. And you can find the account ID if you go here, you go on the main page of AWS, you go on the upper right corner, and you have here account ID. If you click here, you can copy paste this account ID. Okay, and you change it here, and then when your comment is ready, you can just bootstrap CDK. For your information, CDK needs to work with environment. So an environment in CDK is a mix of an account and a region. So if, for example, you want to deploy some resources using CDK in a different region, even though you use the same account, you will need to bootstrap CDK for this new region. And if you create another AWS account and you want to deploy with CDK in that new account, even if you use the same region as we use, EU Central 1, you need to bootstrap CDK for this new account, okay? An environment is really a mix of an account and a region. So now you can go to the lecture 5 directory and run this command, mkdir infra, to create a new directory called infra, and you can just cd inside this directory. I have already created this directory, so I don't need to run those commands. You can just change the name here if you want. We just name it infra because this is where we will define our cloud infrastructure, but if you want to rename it, you can. And then you need to run this command, cdk init app, and then the language. For this course, we are going to use Python as our CDK language, but as you may know, CDK can work with a lot of different languages like TypeScript, JavaScript, and so on. But for this course, if you want to follow along with us, I really recommend to you to use Python. So you can run this command. When it's done, you can open your virtual environment and install those two libraries, the AWS CDK lib and pip file. Basically, when you init the CDK app, CDK will create a virtual environment to install those libraries, especially the AWS CDK lib. But here, we want to use just one virtual environment to deploy with CDK and to play with our Fast API. So that's why you need to add those libraries inside your virtual environment. If you use pipenv, as we do, you can just run this command. But if you use pip, like in any classical Python environment, you can run this command to install the libraries that you need. Now, let's explore the code together. So first, we have this app directory. We have our endpoints. It's the same endpoints as from the previous lecture. And in the main file, we just create the fast API as in the lecture form. There is no changes here, nothing crazy over here. And then we have the pip file and pip file log files. You need those files. So if you use another virtual env, like just classic pip or virtual env, if you don't use pipenv, basically, you will not have those files, so make sure to copy paste them from our code because you will need them later. And then we have this infra directory. As you can see, CDK have created a bunch of new directories and files. It's perfectly normal, it's fine. We are just going to focus on the app file here and the infra subfolder here. In the app file, normally you will have this code. I have commented the code to already replace it with some new code that I'm about to show you. But normally you should have this code where you import the infra stack, where you initialize the app and you initialize infra stack. So let's go to see this infra stack. This is the basic stack created by AWS. You should see something like this. And we have created our own API stack, so you can copy paste our code and put it in this API stack file so you can follow along with us. So for your information, in CDK you have stack and construct. A stack is a set of construct. A stack will contain multiple construct, and a construct is just the basic piece of infrastructure. So let's say that you want to deploy a server and a database, for example. Your server is a construct. It's a basic piece of your infrastructure. Your database is another construct. It's also a basic piece of infra. And then you will create those two constructs inside one stack. And the stack will contain all those different constructs that you need. So in our example here, we have created an API stack that inherits from the stack class from CDK. And then we use the Lambda construct provided by AWS. We use it to create a Lambda layer, and we use it to create a function. So that's how it works with CDK. So let me explain a little bit more this function and this code. So we have the Lambda layer helper. It's just a small helper that we have created. It's not provided by AWS or CDK, but we have worked on a lot of different projects using CDK, and it's really helpful to have this function. Basically, it will just install the right Python libraries inside the right folder, so we can easily deploy them later using a Lambda layer. So you don't have to worry about this function. It's working quite well, and it's just a gift for you. And then in our stack, so we have this function that is going to run. Then we create a Lambda layer. As a reminder, it's a place where we can store our packages and dependencies in Lambda. And if you look at the code, it's pretty easy. You say, where are your packages? What is the Python runtime, the architecture, and a description and a name. And then we create our function. Again, you name it. You give the runtime, the handler, where the code is, and some configuration like the timeout, the architecture, and the memory size. And then we add our Lambda layer. That's all you need for this API stack. So this stack will deploy a Lambda layer and a function. And then if we go back to the app file, so you can replace the old code by this new code. You create an organization name. So organization name is not mandatory by CDK, but it's a good way to know what your API is doing. Basically, if you have multiple projects, you can have multiple organization name or multiple project name, and you can always link those names inside your API. We use them just over here, so you know that this resource is related to this project or this organization. So again, not mandatory, but very handy to use. Then you need the account ID that we just use when we bootstrap CDK, and then the region. Based on that, we will create a CDK app, and then we will create the environment. As I told you, an environment is an account ID and a region. And if you need to deploy with CDK in another region or in another account, you need to create a new environment, and you need to bootstrap CDK for that account and that region. And then we just create our API stack, and we synthesize our code. Okay, now let's run the CDK command. So we can start with CDK, diff, profile, and then our profile. So the diff command will ask CDK to show us the difference between the code that we wrote, the code that is in our API stack here, and what is deployed on AWS. We define our profile, so CDK know which users it can use. And then we have this small star here. It means that we want to see the difference for all stacks. We can change that and give the name of our stack, like API stack. And in this case, CDK will check the difference only for this API stack. As for now, this is our only stack. We can just keep it for now. Okay, I have this error because I have run this on the main directory. I wanted to show you this because it's an error that happens really, really often. Even when you are very familiar with CDK, you just forgot and you are not on the right directory, and it's not going to work. So first, let's start our virtual environment. And then you need to go to lecture 5, and then inside the infra folder. Now that you are inside the infra folder, the command will work. Okay, let's run this. And as you can see, it started. Now we'll wait a little bit, and CDK will show us the difference between our code and our infrastructure. For now, nothing is deployed on AWS, so everything that we wrote in the API stack should be new for CDK. Okay, so indeed, we see that we're about to create a new IAM statement. where we create a new role for a Lambda function. It's normal. It's what we already had when we created the Lambda inside the AWS console. We also created a new role for this Lambda. There is a policy change. Again, it's normal. You create a new role for the Lambda, so that role needs a policy, needs privileges, even if it's just a basic Lambda privilege. And you can see here that we are about to create a new Lambda layer, a new role, as we've just seen, and a new function. So that's exactly what we want. So now we want to deploy this. And we can deploy it with the command CDK deploy, then the name of the stack, and again the profile. So let's run this. Okay. Before creating the resources, CDK asks us our confirmation because we are about to create new IAM policies and statements. And IAM is critical because it's where we manage accesses and privilege. So from a security standpoint, it's a very important piece of the AWS system. And as we touch this piece, it asks us to confirm our changes. Here, we are just about to create a new role for a Lambda functions, a basic role. It's perfectly fine. So you just type Y and enter. We want to proceed and go further with CDK. Okay, now we have successfully deployed our API stack with CDK. So we have created a new Lambda layer and we have created a new Lambda function. Just for information, if you want to delete what we have just created with CDK, you can type CDK destroy, then the name of the stack and the profile that you want to use. And CDK will delete everything that has been created inside the API stack. You can now go back to your AWS console and go to the Lambda page. And as we can see now, we have a new Lambda that was created just 1 minute ago with the name defined inside our API stack. And if you click here, you can see in the configuration tab that the timeout is 30 seconds, like we defined in the API stack also. And in the code, you can see that it's exactly the code in the endpoint file that we have in the lecture 5 folder. So now we have successfully deployed a new Lambda function with CDK. Congratulations! You may have noticed that we didn't create a function URL with CDK. It's because in the next section of this course, we will discover a better tool to connect our Lambda to the internet. That being said, if you want to practice CDK a bit, which I absolutely recommend, you can try to modify the API stack yourself. Look at the CDK documentation for Lambda, try to add a function URL yourself, and deploy it. See you in the next lecture.